Welcome back to the Band Guide, where we use GarageBand to create professional sounding music. I'm your band guy, Colin, and today I want to share with you 2 tricks for when using reverb on instruments. Reverb is a super powerful tool that can make our mix feel like it's in a real space and kind of gives you the ability to shape exactly what that space is and where things live in that space. You can push things forward, pull things back. Now, there's a lot of ways that you can use reverb, but I generally encourage people, especially starting out, to be a little minimal with it. You don't want to completely avoid it, but a lot of early mixers overwhelm their mix with reverb. They just put too much reverb all over the place and ends up being really washed out, and reverb can get kind of muddy quickly, can sound really cloudy in the context of the mix if you overdo it. So what I recommend is being very intentional with how you set your reverb, what you're using reverb on, and the 2 tricks I'm going to share with you today I think will really help you out with that. So the first trick I want to share with you is doing opposite panning for reverbs. So in particular, if you're using really wide panning on sources, which I highly recommend if you want a big wide mix, then you may have noticed that when you pan, let's say, a mandolin all the way off to one ear and a violin all the way off to the other ear, like we have in this mix here, it can sound a little bit odd. It can sound a little bit off balance because we have one thing far left, and even though we're using the violin in this case to balance it on the far right, they can still feel like they're not in a realistic space. So check this out. Listen to just this mandolin and violin together. They play well together. They balance each other largely in terms of volume and tone. We made some efforts in that when we were setting up the volume and the EQs for each of these. But there's still kind of just this big wide space that's left from them. So what I like to do, not always, but when it's appropriate, is set a oppositely panned reverb. So in this case, I have the mandolin panned all the way to the left. What I do is I just duplicate the mandolin track and I just make this a complete reverb track. So if we listen to this track in solo, we'll bring the volume up here. That's only reverb of that original mandolin sound. So if we look at our plugins here, it's the exact same processing as we've done on the mandolin, the channel EQ and then the la-la compressor. But then we've also added a Space Designer plugin, and we've set the dry output to 0. So there's no non-reverb output. And then we just left the reverb output where it was. And that gives us this complete reverb sound. And now we can blend that in. So even though we have a clean, super present version of the mandolin in the far left, now it feels like it's kind of in a realistic space because it's not only in our left ear, we get a little bit in the right ear. And when you blend that in to taste in the context of your mix, it can be subtle. You might not specifically pick up on it, but can feel more natural. Again, we're designing the space. So now it's like you're standing right between a mandolin player on your left. You're hearing the reflections of their playing against the right wall bounce back into your right ear, and you're hearing a violin player on your right ear bouncing back, and you're hearing the reflections of their sound into your left ear. So when you put that together, if you take them away, it's subtle. The other thing that it does, as opposed to just like sending it to our master reverb, for example, is that when you send it to the master reverb, it puts a little reverb in both the left and the right ears. So it doesn't define that space quite as clearly. It doesn't keep it as present in the left ear with the mandolin as if we just put a reverb off into the right ear. I love this trick. I use this a lot on sources that I've panned in one specific direction. I don't do this all over my mix. Usually I only have it on 2, 3, 4, 5 tracks at most. Typically just the 2 main tracks that I've panned to the left and to the right. Okay, let's look at the second big trick when using reverb on instruments, and that's creating a small room space that all of your instruments are living in together. And the easiest way to put kind of all of your sources into one realistic space is by using the built-in buses that are built into GarageBand. So we have our master echo and our master reverb, and if you're on an audio track, you also have the ambience and the reverb knobs over here. Now, if you're using, let's say, GarageBand Drummer or any sort of virtual amp, you might notice you don't get that ambience and reverb knob like you do on the audio tracks. You know, we have these over here. On the drummer track, we don't have that. We have this room sound, but it's different. It's not the same settings. It's not the same exact sound. So if we want to put all of our instruments into one space, my favorite way to do that is to actually turn our master reverb into a short ambience room. So the easiest way to do that is if you just go to any track and go to Edit, Echo, and Reverb Settings, and make sure you select your master reverb. Then you can just select the preset ambience here. And depending on the type of song you're working on, you might want this to be a small hall, the wooden verb. There's a lot of different things that might fit depending on the context of your mix, but the ambience typically is my starting point. And then you can tailor the time. So if you want it to be a little bit larger of a space, slightly bigger, then you could use the time to make it a little bit longer. Or if you want it to be a little bit darker, you could turn this knob to the left and it'll have less high-end information, less brightness. Or if you want it to have just more brightness, you could turn this knob to the right and it'll be a brighter sound. But then if you blend this tone here, which would sound kind of like this. Find a nice subtle point here, typically somewhere under half on most of your sources, and just blend in a little bit of that reverb, then you can create a very natural space around all the instruments in your mix. Now, I highly recommend doing little to none on your bass track, any sort of low-end instruments. If you do too much reverb, it's just not really the way our ears naturally perceive low end. So typically I do little to none on the bass tracks, and I just focus it to be subtle across the other instruments and sometimes backing vocals in the song. And I try to set the levels based on kind of how I want to perceive them in the mix. So if I want them further forward, I'll actually do less reverb. If I want them to be tucked back a little bit, like on some backing vocals, for example, then I might do a little bit more of this reverb. Now this is a short reverb, so no matter how much you do of this, it's not gonna make it really, really distant. But it can really help just give you a cohesive small room sound to your mix. So listen to this and I'll exaggerate it and I'll turn it back down. The nice thing with this reverb is you have a volume knob. So if you set your individual tracks a little bit too loud or a little bit too quiet across your mix, you can use this volume knob to tweak it. And this is the total volume for all of the reverbs that you're sending into this. So it maintains the individual volumes that you've sent to the reverb. And then this is just kind of the output volume of the total reverb sound, if that makes sense. So you send your individual levels to this reverb, and then you can turn it up or down here after you've set the individual levels where you want them to be. So check it out.
I wish you were here, we'll be next time.
Feels really close.
I faced all my fears and love is all I need. I wish you were here, we'll be next time.
It's subtle, I'm not gonna lie to you, it's subtle, but that's what mixing is. If you want your mix to sound professional, then you need to be doing subtle moves across your mix to get you there. And save longer reverbs for things like this individual mandolin reverb. If we look at that individual track, this is a slightly longer reverb. It's still a pretty short reverb just because this song doesn't need a long reverb. But if you save your longer reverbs for specific sources, then they'll stand out more and your mix won't feel so washed out. Now, effects, reverb, delay, they're an important part of the mixing process, but they're just that. They're a part of the mixing process. They're one little piece of the puzzle. And if you want to create professional sounding music inside GarageBand, you can, but you have to be doing all of the pieces of the puzzle. You have to put all the pieces in place for it to sound professional. So I put together something to help you with that. I put together a completely free 6-step checklist that just walks through the 6 steps that all professional mixes have and how you can do them inside GarageBand completely free. There's a link in the description below where you can grab it, so be sure to pick that up. Before we go, I want to hear from you. How do you use reverb in your mixes? Are you setting it intentionally, or are you just kind of throwing it up and seeing how it sounds? Let me know in the comments below. If this video is helpful, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next week with another video.
One thing at a time.